Hey, I'm Sandy.
And I'm Scott.
We're here to talk about the accident with Nathan, our son, who was 20. A couple of years ago, he had an accident. And we're talking today about Scott, the night, starting from the night of the accident and his experience with leaning into God for peace. So I've already done a video on mine, and mine was quite different than his. So it's really, I think it's really interesting to hear how Scott came to his over overwhelming peace, or you
Yeah.
know, and so he's gonna go ahead and tell it.
Well, December 28th, the night, went to bed, knowing Nathan was going to be out late that night. And I awoke suddenly in the middle of the night, which is really kind of rare for me. Um, but waking up, remembering Nathan was going to be out late, I thought I would get on my phone real quick and see if he had made it home or not with Find My Friends. So um, I'd open up Find My Friends, and instantly his little blue dot showed up, and it updated very quickly. So I saw him move across Southern Boulevard, and then it stopped. And I was patiently or impatiently waiting for him to begin movement again, and it just stayed still. So after giving it what seemed like a few minutes, but probably was not that long, I tried to call him, and there was no answer. So I sat watching this still blue dot on Find My Friends, and with no movement. So I called the second time, and no answer. So I jumped out of bed. It was probably about 3 in the morning.
Yeah. Just for context, really quick, for people who aren't local, Southern Boulevard is like an expressway here. So where it pinned him was in the center lanes
The
of
median.
yeah, like on the inside lanes of an expressway, basically. So you would think that he had a
You tell yourself a flat
flat tire.
tire,
Yeah.
and he's busy changing it, and that's why
Yeah.
he's not answering the phone.
Right.
And but I hopped in the car, and I was off, and it's probably about 20 minutes, maybe 15, with no traffic like there was at 3 in the morning. And I started off in search of that blue dot on Southern Boulevard, and made my way there. And as I came over the overpass of Military Trail, and was able to see forward now towards where he was, the entire night sky was filled with red emergency lights. So you can imagine the dread and that sinking feeling as I made my way to the scene. And before I got there, there was a rescue unit going the opposite direction, which would have been towards the trauma center. So in my mind was, well, if that's Nathan, and he was the only one, he's alive. And so I make it up onto the scene. Most of the lanes were actually closed, which really didn't matter. They weren't paying that close attention because I was probably the only vehicle on the road at that moment. And I kind of made my way uh, amongst the apparatus, and walked up to the vehicle and saw that it was Nathan's car. And just as I had started to walk up, I saw an officer going through some of his belongings, which was strewn all over. And the officer picked up his driver's license and said, "Well, he's from Palm Beach Gardens." And that's when I made the statement. I go, "That's my son. This is his car." And the people within earshot of me like turned around and were looking at me like I was a ghost that just appeared. And so I explained who Nathan was, gave him information, asked to talk to the fire captain on scene, and I did. He just basically relaying that my son was unconscious and that he was en route to the trauma center. Um,
Also, for other people, so for people who might not know, Scott was a fireman paramedic and retired at the time, after
yeah,
31 years of service. So he was very familiar with how all the process goes on an emergency like that call, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't have known when you said that. I didn't realize that if a rescue unit is leaving, it means someone's still alive. If they just kind of hang out, usually they're deceased. So, go ahead.
So, and fortunately, for Nathan, it was basically down the street from their special ops station. So Station 34, um, they were the one that responded and were able to cut him out of the car. And a side note, my brother is a EMS captain with the county, and he was on duty that night, and he was nearly the responding EMS captain on that call. And thank God that he didn't have to live through that. Um, so now I'm eastbound. We're going back to the trauma center, and never forget the phone call that I had to make to you. Um, just the dread,
It was not good.
and but just my first words were, Nathan's alive.
Yep.
Uh, but he's been in a bad accident, and I'm on my way to St. Mary's Trauma Center. And so I get to the trauma center. I see the rescue unit, and who was ended up also being the EMS captain that responded there in the driveway, and walked up and relayed information to them on who Nathan was, and trying to get some information on Nathan's status at the moment, because they had already taken Nathan in and made their way back out uh, to the apparatus. And talking to them, relaying that, that was my brother's nephew in there. And they were all a little shocked. They knew my brother well. And actually, my brother was supposed to relieve that EMS captain that next morning, because he was doing another shift. And so made it in and waited for what seemed like forever in the trauma center, waiting to get an update. It was probably a good 2 hours,
Yeah, I got
maybe
there.
longer.
Did I get there? I got there pretty quick.
Yeah.
Right. By the time you were there.
Yeah.
It wasn't too long.
And,
Yeah. And yeah, it was a very long time. It seemed exceptionally long. I mean, I want to say it was like 6 in the morning, kind of.
Yeah, it was
Seemed
probably
like
about
that.
6:30 when we got called back into the operating area of the trauma center
To see him. Yeah.
to see him. And when we walked in there, Nathan was just very still, um, uh, with an airway, and the head neurosurgeon had been on duty, and relayed Nathan's situation, his diagnosis, severe traumatic brain injury, um, and started to explain some things to us. And as I think Sandy's explained, that from some history within our family with TBIs, we had a really good grasp of what was going on.
Yeah.
And the doctor, he probably gave us the most positive outlook in those first moments, because after that, it just was never like that again from any of the doctors.
Yeah, he basically said he could make a full recovery or pass away or anywhere in between, which we were aware of because of the two family members. But
and the fact that he said that he could heal
a
was
full recovery,
better than any doctor said after that.
Yeah.
And for quite a long time. And so he also breathed Shepherd Center into us. He said, I would get him to Shepherd Center as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And that was, we had no idea what Shepherd Center was, but that ended up, looking back, was just what some incredible insight by
I think
him.
it was, God beginning the work.
Yeah.
And breathing into us.
So we sat with Nathan for a few minutes, and then they started to package him up to go ahead and get him up to ICU. And so we waited.
They put the pressure gauge in. We told him it was okay to put the pressure gauge in, or
the ICP.
To read the pressure in his brain. And then that was a while, and then they said they were heading up to ICU.
Yep.
And then that seemed like a long time because they were
Yeah.
having a hard time
Right.
getting them stable. Yeah.
And then so we went up into the IC room, and there, lo and behold, an old neighbor of ours was the head nurse, and
For
he
him.
turned white as a sheet when he saw us walk into the room. He had met Nathan once because Nathan had gone away to school when he was living here and hadn't recognized Nathan.
And I'm surprised you even noticed him. I didn't know him as well as Scott. He was a neighbor, and so I hadn't seen him very often. But he knew Scott, and then but there were so many. They called us back because they couldn't get him stabilized. They knew he was bleeding somewhere, and they had to, ask if it was okay to go do exploratory surgery. So when we came in, as you can imagine, it was a pretty hectic scene, and there was probably 10 nurses and doctors and things all around. It was like the whole
Yeah.
place. It was a small little room, but it was full. So when I walked in, I didn't see anybody. I just was looking at Nathan. I didn't even like, and I'm surprised you even noticed anyone when you walked in. If you look, but you're probably used to looking at people in those types of situations too, with your career and working with emergencies
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah.
And so AJ pulled me out, and he was obviously like, "I can't believe this. I'm so sorry." And he was like, "He's one of us, so we're gonna do everything." And I just think that a lot of that was, in hindsight, just seeing how God was using Nathan um, to be seen by a lot of people.
Yep.
Because between the fire department
With your
and
brother.
then with
Mhm.
my brother, and then now AJ,
There's already
our
like two
neighbor,
connections.
now
Yeah.
there's already people that obviously were 100% in on Nathan as a patient, but now they were really paying
personal.
attention to the outcome,
Yeah.
which wouldn't have been such a normal thing that they would be used to. And so uh, I lived at the hospital from that point on. I mean, it was like,
Maybe 2 hours a day you left just to run home and take a shower.
yeah, for the first 3 days, I didn't even leave.
Yeah, we had to really make him go. I'm like, you stink really bad. You
Yeah.
have to go home. Like, you have to go home and take a shower.
Yeah.
It was bad.
And so that whole thing, and I'd like to share that, people, they mean good by it, and they're like, you need a break, you need to go, you need to take a break. And there's truth in that, but the truth is there is no break.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't matter where you're
No.
at, you are absolutely consumed with the situation.
Yeah.
And probably the best break that you could get was to leave the room and leave the noises, all the monitors and the beeping and the alarm, and that obviously, you know, was a very wearing thing without you like really realizing it. Um, so that was really the only break that you would get, is from just
Yeah.
being in that atmosphere in the moment. But there was no mental or physical break.
Yeah.
And so for 3 days living in the hospital, the first day that I came home was a Sunday to take a shower.
The accident happened Wednesday morning, at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
So it was towards the tail end of the week.
Yeah. So on that, and that was my first moment of grieving. Um, in the hospital, you're just focused on Nathan, the patient, Nathan, your son, being an advocate for him, lots of questions, lots of monitoring, lots of praying, being there in the moment. And so when I came home, that's when I grieved, which was another reason not to come home, even though grieving is such an important part of the process. Um, it's the hardest. And that first Sunday, I was collapsed on the dining room table in prayer, grieving. When I grieved, I was grieving in prayer.
Mm.
And I can remember that prayer began a sequence of prayers that was repetitive. And I remember the first part of my prayer was apologizing that it took this event for me to be leaned in
Yeah.
to
Mm.
Jesus
Mm-hmm.
like I should have been every day. And after that apology, probably game the uh, uh, was the hardest prayer I've ever prayed in my life. Um, was acknowledging that Nathan belonged to God,
Mm.
and that in saying the words, "He's yours to take back."
Yeah.
And when you verbalize that, it just gives it a lot of.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
it makes it
especially when it's
very
in
real,
that situation, it's
very very real.
yeah, it's a little bit easier when, like I did the podcast on mine, but like when I prayed, he was still, you know, not injured, but it still was very hard
Yeah,
because, I had the thoughts that something bad's going to happen.
right.
So it's still, you're still at that breaking point, like where you're broken and you're just like, I have nothing else. I can't do anything. I have no control over it, right?
Zero
And
control.
God's the one that gave Nathan to us in the first place.
Yeah.
And obviously we know that, but as parents, you think you can take care of everything and always fix things and help them. And
Yeah. So acknowledging that out loud was excruciatingly difficult. Um, and then just following in that prayer of, I know that if you take Nathan, he's going to a better place. And that leads you to realize too that you're asking God for Nathan not to go to a better place. That it's kind of selfish
it is.
in a sense
Mhm.
that you're asking for him to be here and not in a better place. But I'm a father, and I use that language. I said, God, you're a father, and you know a father's heart, and I'm begging that um, he heals here on this
Mhm.
side,
Yep.
and that I get to continue to hug on and love my son. And but I said, if you take him, you're going to have to give me
Yep.
a lot because I'm going to need a lot to get through it.
Yep.
And I like to say I felt pressed against Jesus at that time, um, like incredibly pressed. Like I talk about uh, the the woman that touched
Yeah.
Jesus's garment when he walked by, and Jesus stopped. And while I'm sure that Jesus knew who touched him, it was part of what he wanted to show was who touched me. He turned.
Yeah.
He goes, who touched me? And I like to say that um, Jesus didn't have to ask that of me because
The
I
face
was
impression on
I
his
was
chest.
grasped into him so hard that he probably had a difficult time breathing. So I felt that leaned in to Jesus at the time,
Mm.
and so that was a prayer that I would come home pretty much regularly after that, for an hour or so from the hospital to take a shower, but I would grieve, and that was my prayer.
Mm.
And for me it was 7 days, and I think maybe God made it from Sunday to Sunday to help me remember to to tell the story, the testimony. But on that next Sunday I was on my knees at our sofa, uh, praying that prayer, and the Holy Spirit spoke to me, and the Holy Spirit said, this is way bigger than Nathan's healing.
Yep.
And I was filled instantly with a peace that is beyond all understanding. So I don't know how other people experience that peace, or how long or how short it comes. But for me, um, after a week, it was dramatic.
Yeah.
It was a dramatic
it.
change within me. I like to explain that piece. You try and go back and you go, how do I explain this?
Yeah. Because
And
it's pretty much unexplainable.
it is. And
Right.
I like to explain it in a way. I felt like I was drowning.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say drowning in grief.
Yeah.
In a way. But I was drowning in black water, disoriented, with no idea where the surface was. And my lungs were burning, and just that desperation and thinking this is it. And then all of a sudden, if you could imagine breaking the surface of the water,
Mm-hmm.
and you get that, your lungs fill with that first breath of air,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling, that's how I kind of like to relate that that peace that came with that dramatic piece. I take my shower, I'm in the car going back, and I'm different, I'm changed. I walk in to the security guards there, the ladies that had gotten to know us. They knew Nathan well, in the sense that Nathan, there were so many visitors.
There was so many.
So everyone kind of knew Nathan.
He was kind of a big deal.
And which again was just part of, I think, of God using this. And so you have to understand, my son's still in a coma. He's still
10 days. I mean, he was
right,
still, they hadn't done the cranie yet, and he was pretty serious. Like,
yeah,
he was
and
not
we're still the
doing
doctors
well.
And I really truly believe that the doctors were giving us zero hope, because they had none, and they didn't want to give us any. And so as I walk in and the security guards are there, I say, ladies, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to pray for my son up there. And they're like, oh, Mr. Todd, we're praying for your son. And I said, no, you don't understand. I said, that's a miracle happening up there. Mm-hmm. And I want you to be a part of it. And I mean, I don't even realize what I'm saying. I'm just, it's just coming out of me.
That peace, and then
it's that
with
peace.
that piece of boldness comes, I don't even 100%. Know how to. Yeah, because I was proclaiming things all over the place, and when I think back about it, I'm like, people probably thought I was crazy, but it's like God just gives you that boldness because you have such a peace that you have to tell.
And so I make my way up, and there's the trauma doctor, who we love him.
Yes.
He was a big part. God used him in saving Nathan's life. But he was rough. He
had very little positive to say.
And I remember walking up, he was in the center area of the ICU at the desk at a computer. And I just knew better than to proclaim a miracle to him at the moment. So I say, hey, doc, I said, I just want to let you know that I'm feeling really good about the direction Nathan's going. And I just walked into the room with Sandy, and he couldn't handle that. He came right in and
did some testing.
Did his
little
testing,
pokes and twists and turns.
And of course, Nathan, being in his coma, gave him 0. And
he was so drugged up too. Like, I think about it, he was in an induced coma basically. Yeah. So I don't know.
And he just looked at me and Sandy, and he goes, he's like one step above the worst, and left the room. And I remember
the nurse was in there too. That's an important detail,
right?
Too,
yeah. And I just had to. I go to Sandy. There was a chair out in the back of the hospital that the maintenance people would eat lunch and things, after, on their breaks. Outside, I'm assuming, and so that was my prayer chair. So I remember I told Sandy, I said, I gotta go outside. Like, it's just like taking the wind out of your sails a little bit. And but that's when I realized too, that was the big realization that Jesus wants you to continue the lean. Yeah. So you're believing, and that's where I like to say that before I had that peace, when the Holy Spirit talked to me, I believed that Nathan could be healed. Mm-hmm. After I had the peace and the Holy Spirit spoke to me, that's when I believed he was going to be healed. Yes. But you're believing on something that's unseen. Yep.
And everybody,
and you're surrounded, you, right? What you see is the opposite
Right.
of what you're believing. So that's the battle. The battle is while you're in and surrounded by the unbelieving, it's believing in the unseen and what the Holy Spirit had shared with me.
Yeah.
And so I obviously go out and I'm praying and trying to, and not trying, but staying in that peace, leaning into Jesus and staying in that peace. And that it was an amazing part of the journey. So what I discovered is that it all starts with we all want peace,
Mhm.
and we all want strength. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
constant message
Mhm.
being shared that Jesus offers. It's a constant message that you hear people, believers and non-believers, stating that they want
Mhm.
peace, they want strength. But what I found is I had to first release everything to God. And for me, it took a horrific event for me to release everything to God.
Mhm.
I had no other place to go.
Yeah.
The world was giving me nothing.
Yeah.
So I had no other place to go. So I had to release everything. And when I released everything, even though it didn't come instantly for me, eventually I got that peace beyond all understanding.
Yeah.
And that's where you begin to get the strength.
Mhm.
Because I don't think that you can have
No.
the strength without first the release and the peace.
Yeah.
And I know that people have gotten back with us since, and there's been 3 responses that I noticed that we received from
Yeah.
people. The first response of some people was they were scared and they kind of went away.
Yeah. They
They
couldn't come back.
they had a really difficult time with us speaking some goodness coming out of this,
Mhm.
and having a joy. And
In the
obviously it's
midst of
difficult
it.
to talk of a joy in the midst of that, because we're not joyous in the event, but we're joyous in that peace
Yeah.
that God gives you. And um, quite frankly, just the joy knowing that even if God had taken Nathan
Would be in a better.
was going to be in a better
Yeah.
place. So there's joy in that
Either way. Yeah.
either way. But then the second response was is people thought that we didn't understand what was happening.
Yep.
There were some people that were like,
No, even Allie
wow.
Rogan had gone through it, and she was clueless when her daughter had her accident.
Per her words, she
Well,
said,
yeah,
yeah.
she's like, and she would research, and she's like, I don't understand. She thought like even a weekend. She's like, are we going to be checking out soon? Like she thought it was going to be a quick thing, and we knew, and she was like, does she not realize? Because she knew the severity of it. Does she not realize it?
And we understood the severity
Oh
the
yeah,
entire
from the
time from
second he told
the
us.
second that he told us what
Mhm.
the injury was. And so that certainly wasn't the case, but that's what people thought because they
Mhm.
saw that peace and strength in us
Yeah.
from God. It wasn't us. When I
Yeah.
say us, it was God's peace and strength.
Yeah,
It
for
wasn't
sure.
us.
Yep.
Um,
Oh yeah, there's
and then there was the third group, which actually were like,
it's pretty cool.
they shared with us they would leave and they go, Nathan's going to be healed.
Yeah, they would come and they
Because
would.
for them to have that peace and that strength,
There's
Nathan's going to be
yeah.
healed. We believe.
Yeah, because we were
And
speaking it over. We were vocalizing. Like I know 2 people. I know for sure 2 couples that came, and they were kind of basically were saying they were so heavy hearted when they came with the severity of it, and they came to pray. Actually, both of the couples, different times I think, but they both voiced to us that they left there knowing, first of all, like renewed and feeling uplifted, and knowing that God was gonna heal Nathan, based on our uh, faith, I guess, or, our uh, um, being so positive in the faith that we believed that God was going to heal him.
yeah, and it's because of what God had breathed into us.
Exactly.
It wasn't us just blindly going, God's going to heal them because he can.
Yeah.
It was because we felt that God said, I'm going to.
Yeah.
And so I because I know there's so many stories where people had strong faith and strong belief,
Yeah.
and
That's
there
not.
wasn't a healing on this
Yeah.
side. Um, and for God's purpose, He chose Nathan's
Yeah.
healing on this side,
Yeah.
and it's been life changing for us,
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's been awesome. Like, Nathan says it's the worst and best thing that's ever happened to him. I don't know if I would say. I mean, obviously, it would be the worst thing that's happened in our family, as far as our two
Yeah.
boys and us. But looking back, um, I I guess when you have that peace, you have certainly very hard, difficult moments and hours and that, but I think that God gives you that, you just have that peace, and it's like, you just know He's working all the time. So when you know like, okay, we're gonna get through it, and we didn't know really at the time. Those first early couple of months was actually, it was hard, but the recovery after being released from the hospital,
It's harder.
yeah, the outpatient recovery ended up being more challenging, as a couple, as a family. And we were truly like in the wilderness, because the first 45 days we were here in Palm Beach County, and we had all our family and friends that were our local. They were coming constantly. We had a lot of support, a lot of support. And then when we left, we did have, we went to Atlanta, to Shepherd Center. We had a lot of people would come and visit, and that usually happened on the weekends. But then, and that became kind of lonely inpatient there, but we still had support within the hospital. And then we were there inpatient for 2 months, and then he was released, just over 100 days in total from inpatient. And then that began a whole other, we were literally in the wilderness. Like, the devil was attacking us. I mean, 24/7. It was rough. That was really dark and scary times. And for anybody who's has a loved one that's had a TBI in particular, that in the recovery is, the survival isn't just the hardest part. It's the recovery, and still continual unanswered questions as to, is this the end point? Is this the end point? Is this the end point? Is
You
this
don't.
what our
You
life's going to
never
look like?
know where the starting point is when they start to emerge. How much are they going to remember and be able to do? And then once they do start to emerge, you never know where the finish line's going to
Yeah.
be. Nathan hasn't reached his finish line yet. A lot closer now than it was a year ago,
Yeah.
the finish line. But you just never know where that finish line is. So you're just always, praying for
Yeah.
continued healing
Yeah.
and and for improvement for
Yeah.
their sake and for your sake,
Yeah.
and and just putting it all in God's hands, because
Yeah.
God has a plan. Um, he saved him for a reason, and so wherever his finish line is, and his healing
Yeah.
is where it is, and God has a plan to use him,
Yeah. Yeah.
to use
Okay.
Nathan through that.
And I think all of us really.
Well, 100%.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time.